Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent weekends at shopping malls and movie theaters, she could be found at her grandfather's farm, learning to shoot tin cans off fence posts with an old hunting rifle. Her grandfather, a retired military veteran, had taught her that shooting was about patience, breathing, and respect for the weapon. When Sarah turned 18, she decided to join the local shooting club. She had saved every penny from her part-time job at the diner to buy her first real rifle. But when she walked into the gun store, the salesman looked at her with doubt in his eyes. "You sure you want something this serious, little lady?" the gray-haired man asked, pointing to the professional rifles behind the glass case. "Maybe you'd prefer something smaller, easier to handle." Sarah shook her head firmly. She knew exactly what she wanted. After months of research and reading every shooting magazine she could find, she had decided on a precision rifle that could handle long-distance shots. But there was one problem. The only one in her budget was bright red. The rifle had been a custom order that someone never picked up. The previous customer had wanted it painted in a flashy red color, but then changed his mind about the purchase. The gun store owner was happy to sell it at a discount just to get it off his shelf. "Most serious shooters prefer black or camouflage," the salesman warned her. "This red color makes it look like a toy gun." But Sarah didn't care about the color. She cared about the quality of the barrel, the precision of the scope, and the smooth action of the bolt. She handed over her hard-earned money and walked out with the bright red rifle, ignoring the stares and whispers from other customers. The next Saturday, Sarah arrived at Pine Valley Shooting Range for the first time. The range was known throughout the state as the place where serious marksmen came to test their skills. It had targets set up at various distances, from 100 meters all the way out to 3,000 meters for the most advanced shooters. As Sarah walked through the parking lot carrying her rifle case, she noticed the expensive trucks and SUVs belonging to other club members. Most of these men had been shooting for decades and had spent thousands of dollars on their equipment. They wore military-style clothing and carried heavy, professional-looking rifle cases. When Sarah opened her case and assembled her bright red rifle, the laughter started almost immediately. "Look what we have here," called out Marcus Webb, a man in his 50s who considered himself the unofficial leader of the range. "Someone brought their kid's toy gun to play with the big boys." Other shooters gathered around, grinning and pointing at Sarah's rifle. The bright red color stood out like a fire truck among their black and camouflage weapons. "Did you get that from a toy store?" asked another man, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "I didn't know they made real guns in cartoon colors." Sarah felt her face burning with embarrassment, but she kept her expression calm. Her grandfather had taught her that actions spoke louder than words. She quietly set up at the 200-meter range and began checking her scope alignment. "Don't waste your time on the baby range," Marcus called out mockingly. "If you want to play with the real shooters, you need to try the 1,000-meter targets." The 1,000-meter range was where the experienced shooters tested their skills. It required not just good aim, but understanding of wind conditions, bullet drop, and atmospheric pressure. Most new members needed months of practice before they could even hit the target at that distance. Sarah looked down the range at the distant targets, barely visible even with her scope. She had never shot at such a long distance before, but she had studied the theory extensively. Her grandfather had taught her the math behind long-distance shooting, and she had practiced the breathing techniques until they were second nature. "I'll give it a try," she said simply. Packing up her equipment and moving to the advanced range, this caused even more laughter among the men. Several of them followed her just to watch what they expected to be an embarrassing failure. They set up chairs and pulled out binoculars, treating it like entertainment. "This should be good," Marcus said to his friends. "I bet she can't even see the target, let alone hit it." Sarah took her time setting up her shooting position. She adjusted her bipod legs carefully and checked her scope settings. The wind was light but variable, which would make the shot more challenging. She studied the flags placed at intervals down the range, watching how they moved to judge the wind patterns. The target at 1,000 meters looked impossibly small through her scope. Even with high magnification, it was just a tiny circle in the distance. Sarah controlled her breathing and settled into position. She had learned to block out distractions and focus entirely on the shot. The first shot hit the target, but it was off-center. The men behind her stopped laughing and started paying closer attention. It was unusual for a newcomer to even hit the target on their first try at this distance. Sarah made a small adjustment to her scope and fired again. This shot was closer to the center ring. By her fifth shot, she was consistently hitting the bullseye area. "Lucky shots," Marcus muttered, but his voice had lost some of its mocking tone. The range master, an elderly man named Frank who had been running the facility for 20 years, walked over to check Sarah's target through his spotting scope. "Well, I'll be damned," Frank said quietly. "Those aren't lucky shots. This girl knows what she's doing." Word spread quickly through the range that the new girl with the red rifle was actually hitting targets at 1,000 meters. Other shooters stopped their own practice sessions to come watch. Some of them had been shooting for years and still struggled with accuracy at that distance. But the real test was yet to come. At the far end of Pine Valley Range, past all the regular shooting positions, stood a target that most members only dreamed of hitting. It was positioned at 2,900 meters, nearly 3 kilometers away. On a clear day, you could barely see it even with powerful binoculars. This extreme distance target had become something of a legend at the range. In the 5 years since it had been installed, only 3 shots had ever hit it. All 3 were made by Marcus Webb, who held the unofficial record and never let anyone forget it. "If you really think you're something special," Marcus said with a sneer, "why don't you try the long shot? But I should warn you, that's not for beginners playing with toy guns." Sarah looked down the range at the distant target. At 2,900 meters, success would require not just skill, but also perfect conditions and a bit of luck. The bullet would be in flight for several seconds, giving wind and gravity plenty of time to affect its path. But something in Marcus's mocking tone sparked a determination in Sarah that surprised even her. Her grandfather had always told her that the biggest enemy of a good shot was doubt. If you second-guessed yourself, you had already missed before pulling the trigger. "I'd like to try," Sarah said calmly. The entire shooting range fell silent when Sarah announced her intention to attempt the 2,900-meter shot. Even Frank, the range master, looked concerned. He had seen overconfident shooters before, and attempting such a difficult shot too early in their training could damage their confidence permanently. "Miss, I appreciate your enthusiasm," Frank said carefully, "but maybe you should work your way up to the long shots. Most of our experienced members practice for years before attempting that distance." Marcus Webb laughed loudly. "Let her try, Frank. When she misses by 50 meters, maybe she'll understand this isn't a game for little girls with colorful toys." A crowd began to gather as word spread that someone was going to attempt the legendary long shot. Members stopped their practice sessions and retrieved their spotting scopes and binoculars. Some pulled out lawn chairs, settling in for what they expected to be an amusing spectacle. Sarah ignored the growing audience and focused on the task ahead. She walked to the extreme distance shooting position, a concrete bench positioned at the very end of the range. The 2,900-meter target was barely visible as a tiny speck in the distance, even with her rifle scope set to maximum magnification. She spent 20 minutes studying the conditions. The wind flags along the range showed a complex pattern of air movement. Near the shooting position, there was barely any wind, but halfway down the range, the flags indicated a steady crosswind from the left. At the target end, the wind appeared to be swirling and unpredictable. "Taking your time won't help when your rifle can't even reach that far," called out Tom Bradley, one of Marcus's regular shooting partners. "That toy gun probably doesn't have enough power to send a bullet half that distance." Sarah continued her preparation, checking and rechecking her calculations. She pulled out a small notebook where she had written formulas for compensating for various factors that affected long-distance shots. Her grandfather had made her memorize these calculations, but she wanted to double-check her math for such an extreme shot. The bullet would drop significantly over 2,900 meters, requiring her to aim well above the target. The wind would also push the bullet sideways during its long flight time. Even factors like air temperature and humidity would affect the bullet's path over such a distance. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said to his friends, but quietly enough that Sarah couldn't hear. "She's been shooting here for what, 2 hours? And she thinks she can make a shot that took me 5 years to master." Frank approached Sarah with a measuring tape and calculator. As range master, he was responsible for ensuring all shots were properly documented, especially at the extreme distance. "I need to verify your rifle setup and ammunition," Frank explained. "For the 2,900-meter record, we have specific requirements." Sarah nodded and showed Frank her rifle and ammunition. Her bright red rifle was actually built on a high-quality action with a precision barrel. The scope was a professional model capable of the magnification needed for extreme distance work. Her ammunition was match grade, designed for accuracy rather than maximum power. "This is actually excellent equipment," Frank admitted, examining the rifle more closely. "The color threw me off, but this is serious hardware." Marcus overheard Frank's comment and scowled. He had spent considerably more money on his setup, and it annoyed him that a newcomer with a red rifle might have equipment comparable to his own. "Equipment doesn't make the shooter," Marcus said loudly. "You need experience and skill to make shots like this." Sarah finished her preparations and settled into shooting position. The concrete bench was designed for stability, with adjustable rests for the rifle. She positioned herself carefully, ensuring that her body was aligned properly and that she could maintain the position comfortably for several minutes. Through her scope, the distant target looked impossibly small. At maximum magnification, it appeared as a tiny circle that wavered and shimmered in the heat mirage rising from the range floor. Sarah had to wait for moments when the mirage settled to get a clear view. She controlled her breathing and began the mental process her grandfather had taught her. First, she calculated the bullet drop and adjusted her scope accordingly. Then she estimated the wind correction needed, based on her observations of the flags and her experience from the shorter distance shots. The crowd behind her had grown to include almost every member present at the range. Word had spread that someone was attempting the legendary shot, and people had driven over from the pistol ranges and other facilities to watch. Some were setting up video cameras, hoping to record either a historic success or an embarrassing failure. $5 says she misses the entire backstop, someone in the crowd whispered. "I'll take that bet," replied another voice. "She hit everything at 1,000 meters. Maybe she's better than she looks." Sarah blocked out the voices and focused entirely on the shot. She could feel her heartbeat and timed her breathing to work between the beats. The crosshairs in her scope danced slightly with each heartbeat, and she waited for the natural pause between breaths when everything became still. The trigger on her rifle was adjusted to break cleanly with minimal pressure. Sarah had practiced her trigger control until it was smooth and consistent. She began applying pressure gradually, increasing it slowly until the rifle fired almost as a surprise. The loud crack of the rifle shot echoed across the range. Immediately, everyone with binoculars and spotting scopes turned their attention to the distant target. At 2,900 meters, it would take several seconds for the bullet to reach its destination. "I don't see an impact," called out someone with a spotting scope. "Check the dirt behind the target," suggested another observer. "Most misses at that distance hit the backstop." Frank had the most powerful spotting scope on the range, and he studied the target area carefully. The heat mirage made it difficult to see details clearly, but he was experienced at reading distant impacts. "Wait," Frank said slowly, adjusting his scope focus. "I think I see something on the target itself." The crowd pressed closer, everyone trying to get a look through the various scopes and binoculars. Some people started jogging down the range to get a closer view, but even at 500 meters, the details were hard to make out clearly. Marcus Webb pushed his way to Frank's spotting scope, demanding to see for himself. He had the most experience reading impacts at extreme distances, and the others would trust his judgment. "Let me see that scope," Marcus said, shouldering Frank aside. He spent a long moment adjusting the focus and studying the distant target. The expression on Marcus's face changed slowly from skepticism to disbelief. He looked up from the scope, then back down again, as if he couldn't trust what he was seeing. "Well?" demanded the crowd. "Did she hit it or not?" Marcus straightened up slowly, his face pale. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. "We need to drive down there," he said finally. "We need to see this up close." The crowd buzzed with excitement and speculation as Frank started up his ATV for the long drive down the range to check the target. This was the moment of truth. Either Sarah had made an incredible shot, or she had missed, and Marcus was just being dramatic. Sarah remained in shooting position, watching through her scope as the distant figures loaded into vehicles and began the journey to the target. Her hands were steady, but she could feel adrenaline coursing through her body. She had felt the shot break cleanly, and the rifle had recoiled straight back, indicating good follow-through. But at 2,900 meters, even perfect technique couldn't guarantee success. As the minutes passed, waiting for confirmation, the crowd grew restless. Some members began placing bets on what Frank would find when he reached the target. Others debated whether a hit would count if it was just barely on the paper versus a solid impact in the scoring rings. Sarah finally stood up from the shooting bench and safed her rifle. Whatever happened next, she knew she had done everything right. Her grandfather had always taught her that you could only control your own actions, not the results. She had made the best shot she was capable of making under the conditions. The 15-minute drive to the 2,900-meter target felt like an eternity to everyone waiting at the shooting line. Frank's ATV kicked up a dust cloud as he raced down the range road, followed by several members in pickup trucks. Sarah remained at the firing line, her bright red rifle now attracting respectful glances instead of mocking laughter. Marcus Webb rode with Frank, his hands gripping the ATV's roll bar as they bounced over the rough terrain. Despite his earlier mockery, he found himself hoping that Sarah had made the shot. A successful hit would be good for the range's reputation, even if it came from an unexpected source. When they reached the target area, Frank immediately pulled out his tape measure and inspection tools. The 2,900-meter target was a large steel plate with scoring rings painted on it. Around the target, the dirt backstop was pockmarked with impacts from previous attempts, most of them complete misses that had struck the earth instead of the target. Frank approached the target slowly, studying it from different angles. Marcus followed behind, his expression unreadable. The other members who had made the drive clustered nearby, trying to get a clear view. "Well," called out Tom Bradley, who had been one of the loudest skeptics, "do you see anything?" Frank didn't answer immediately. He was studying a small, clean hole near the center of the target. The hole was perfectly round, indicating a direct hit rather than a fragment or ricochet. He pulled out his measuring tools and carefully measured the distance from the hole to the center of the target. Marcus leaned in close, examining the hole himself. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disbelief, and finally, grudging respect. "It's a hit," Frank announced, his voice carrying clearly across the target area. "Clean hit, 2.3 inches from center. That's better than any of Marcus's 3 successful shots." The news hit the group like a lightning bolt. Marcus's best shot had been 4.1 inches from center, and that had taken him 5 attempts over 2 years. Sarah had done better on her first try. "Let me see that," demanded Tom Bradley, pushing forward to examine the hole. "Are you sure it's from her shot? Maybe it's an old impact." Frank shook his head. "This hole is fresh. You can see the bright metal where the bullet went through. And look at this. He pointed to the edges of the hole, which were still slightly warm from the bullet's passage. This impact is maybe 10 minutes old. Marcus stood silently, staring at the hole in the target. His 3 successful shots at this distance had been the achievement he was most proud of. He had bragged about them for years, using them to establish his dominance at the range. Now, a young woman with a red rifle had surpassed his record on her first attempt. "We need to get back and tell everyone," Frank said, pulling out his camera to document the impact. "This is going in the range record book." The drive back to the shooting line was subdued. Marcus rode in silence, lost in thought. The other members whispered among themselves, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Meanwhile, back at the firing line, Sarah had cleaned her rifle and was packing it back into its case. The remaining crowd watched her with new respect, though they still hadn't received confirmation of the results. The bright red rifle that had been a source of mockery an hour earlier now seemed almost heroic. "How long have you been shooting?" asked an older member named George Patterson. His tone was polite and curious, completely different from the dismissive attitude Sarah had encountered earlier. "My grandfather taught me starting when I was 12, Sarah replied simply. "But this is my first time at a formal range." George looked impressed. "Your grandfather must be quite a teacher. What did he do before he retired?" "He was a Marine sniper in Vietnam," Sarah said. "He always told me that shooting was about patience and fundamentals, not expensive equipment or showing off." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Frank's ATV returning. As soon as the vehicles appeared in the distance, the crowd gathered eagerly for the results. Sarah tried to appear calm, but her heart was racing as Frank parked and walked toward the group. Frank's face was serious as he approached, giving no hint of what he had discovered. The crowd fell silent, waiting for his announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank said formally, "we have a new range record for the 2,900-meter target." He paused for dramatic effect. Sarah Martinez, shooting her bright red rifle, scored a hit 2.3 inches from center on her first attempt. The crowd erupted in amazement. Some members cheered and applauded, while others stood in stunned silence. Several people rushed to congratulate Sarah, who accepted their praise with quiet grace. Marcus Webb climbed down from Frank's ATV and walked slowly toward Sarah. The crowd parted to let him through, sensing that this was an important moment. Marcus had ruled the range through intimidation and boasting for years, and everyone wanted to see how he would react to being surpassed. Sarah watched Marcus approach, unsure of what to expect. She had seen his type before, men who used aggression to cover their insecurity. But as Marcus got closer, she saw something different in his expression. "That was an incredible shot," Marcus said, extending his hand. "I owe you an apology for my behavior earlier. I was wrong to judge you based on your rifle's color or your age." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Thank you. I understand why you were skeptical. I know I don't look like your typical long-range shooter." "You've just proven that skill has nothing to do with appearance," Marcus admitted. "That shot you made? I've been trying to beat my own record for 3 years. You just crushed it on your first try." Frank approached with the range record book, a thick leather-bound journal where significant achievements were recorded. "Sarah, would you please sign the book and tell us about your rifle setup? This is definitely going to be remembered as a historic day at Pine Valley Range." As Sarah signed her name in the record book, she reflected on how dramatically the day had changed. She had arrived as an outsider with a strange-looking rifle, facing mockery and disbelief. Now she was being treated as a respected member of the shooting community, her achievement earning her a place in range history. The bright red rifle that had caused so much laughter was now the subject of serious technical discussions. Several members asked about its specifications, ammunition choice, and scope settings. The color that had made it seem like a toy was now simply an interesting characteristic of a proven precision instrument. "Will you be coming back next weekend?" asked George Patterson. "We're having our monthly long-range competition, and I think you'd do very well." Sarah nodded, smiling. "I'll be here. My grandfather always said that one good shot is just the beginning. You have to prove you can do it consistently." As the day ended and members began packing up their equipment, the story of Sarah's incredible shot spread throughout the shooting community. By evening, the tale had been shared on social media and shooting forums across the state. The young woman with the bright red rifle had become a sensation. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't the record or the recognition. It was the lesson her grandfather had taught her years ago, that true skill speaks for itself, regardless of what others think. The mockery had been silenced not by anger or arguments, but by a single, perfect shot that proved what she was capable of achieving. The bright red rifle that had made her stand out as different was now a symbol of her unique path to success. Sometimes being different wasn't a disadvantage. Sometimes it was exactly what made you unforgettable.